Welcome to the Business of School podcast, brought to you by Cole Connect. Get ready for a journey of topical insights, engaging conversations, and maybe a few aha moments from the business, finance, and technology side of schools. Cole School experts are your host, and with our guests from the world of education, we're about to embark on a learning adventure to support you in the business of your school. Award-winning speaker Trudy MacDonald from Talent Code HR shares pearls of wisdom pertaining to effective school leadership. From school councils, strategies, and building a culture of performance, we discuss future trends that may impact the roles of school councils and leadership teams. Highlighting accountability practices, characteristics of high-performance teams, and balancing strategy and operations, there is sure to be some insightful takeaways for everyone. Hello Trudy, so nice to see you again.
Great, Kenton, great to see you too.
Welcome to the Business of School podcast. It's great to have you on board today, and I'm really looking forward to talking about effective school leadership. Really can't wait to hear your insights into this. And maybe to start with, let's talk about the defining roles of council and leadership. So could you explain maybe the primary roles that each of those groups have in a school environment and how they might collaborate together to achieve the common goals of the school?
I sure can, Kenton, and thank you so much for having me on the podcast today. I think it's interesting when you start to think about a school council or a school board and the really critical role that they play in a school environment. I think for most leaders, it's quite obvious that the role of the council is one of governance. However, a high-performing school council or board extends their responsibilities well beyond that. And one of the things I find is really powerful for boards to understand is that they are a critical part of the ecosystem of what it means to be a high-performance school. And in fact, one of the most important things they need to recognise is that their relationships with the leadership team, with the community, with staff in some instances is absolutely critical. And it's through those relationships that they can successfly fulfill their other responsibilities.
Because they're an integral part of it, aren't they?
Yeah.
And quite often you see that they think they're on the outside of it, and even though that might not be intentional. But to be able to make sure they bring them into that ecosystem of the school is so vitally important.
Yeah, it absolutely is. However, the way that takes place and the way it actually expresses itself is really important because I've seen it done really poorly.
Right.
And I've also seen it done really well. So when it's not working well, I often find that members of the school council are getting too involved in business as usual and, in fact, actually stepping on the toes of the leadership team, which can create some confusion around role clarity and who's responsible for what. But it can also be quite disempowering for leaders.
We see that a lot as well.
Balance, right, is really critical.
Yeah, it's operational to the governance side of things and knowing where the line is drawn.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And if you can get it right, I find that school councils can be really effective at contributing to the strategy of the school. And that's not necessarily creating the school strategy, but being involved in the co-creation process. So how the school council and the leadership team actually come together, share ideas, share insights, and have this real sense of joint creation and hence joint accountability for setting up the strategy. So there's some of the key responsibilities of the council. But then if we look at it from the other perspective and ask what's the role of the leadership team, there's some very obvious responsibilities there. And I think the key one is to be leading and executing on the operations of the school to ensure that it's sustainable and that it's successful. However, they also play a really critical role implementing strategy. And often that's where you get some clear distinction between the role of the school council and the leadership team. So together they co-create the strategy, but it's the leadership team that executes it. And the other critical responsibility that's often overlooked is the role of the leadership team in educating the school council. So being subject matter experts, we can't assume that the school council actually knows everything. So how do we engage in what I often call upward mentoring or upward coaching so that we're setting the council up for success by sharing insights, sharing knowledge, helping them become smarter so that they can incorporate all of that into their decision making.
I think that's a really good point, because unlike so many other sectors, in the school sector, so many members of these councils and governance boards are volunteers, and yes, they have an interest within the school for a very different reason that you would in a corporate environment. So the two-way information and the helping each other, that collaboration and upskilling and developing each other of not just an understanding what's going on at the school, but to be able to develop the ability of those that are in those leadership roles is absolutely key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that the way that takes place is really important. So often getting the leadership team and the board together to actually talk about their ways of working and how are they going to share knowledge. What are the differences in the roles? How are they going to behave when they come together? How are they going to behave separately? How will they hold each other accountable? These are all really critical conversations.
And it's important to have those conversations because there's a need for an acceptance as well, that this is what needs to happen and this is what is happening, to be able to be effective leadership.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, if we can get clarity of expectations, and often this is something that you'd want to do on an annual basis, and or if there's new members coming into the council or the leadership team, it's a really powerful opportunity for a reset. Yeah. And that sets everybody up for success with a common understanding of what it means to be successful.
You mentioned there as well high performance, and I know this is something you talk about quite a bit, Trudy. Can you describe what you think are the key characteristics of a high performance team within a school setting?
Yes, and you're absolutely right. I'm passionate about creating high performance environments, and schools are no exception. So I spend a lot of time with boards in a school environment, helping them become a high performance team. And it's interesting thinking about a school council or a board as a team, but they really are. They need to have all the same characteristics as the leadership team, who also need to be operating as a high performance team, albeit they've got different objectives. So if I elevate the conversation for a moment and start to talk about what are the characteristics of a high performance team, there are many. However, probably the most important one in my mind is trust. And when I talk about trust, I talk about the ability for members of the board or the council and the leadership team, both separately, but then together, to have a high trust relationship. And what that means is that they can depend on each other to do what they say that they're going to do. They feel safe being vulnerable with each other. And this is absolutely key, because with vulnerability comes the opportunity to ask for help, to not have all of the answers, and to be able to have a conversation in a way that invites others to share their ideas and input. And with trust comes the opportunity to really invite different perspectives, because in a low trust environment, often we feel the pressure to be the smartest person in the room. And I often see this when leadership teams are presenting to boards. There's this persona that they've got all the answers and everything's perfect, because they actually don't trust them enough to be vulnerable and to share the truth around what may be happening or some of the things that aren't going so well. And I also see it in reverse, where sometimes either when the board's engaging with the leadership team, there's not enough trust for them to be vulnerable and say, you know what, I don't really understand artificial intelligence and how that's going to impact the school environment. Can you help me with that? Or worse still, I see it within teams. So often, as you mentioned, Kenton, in school councils or boards, there's a lot of volunteers. People are coming from different educational backgrounds, different career perspectives. They've often got different agendas. Sometimes there's personal agendas, because they may actually have children or family members in the particular school. And without having that high trust environment, often they can't actually engage in an honest conversation with each other. There's a lot of posturing. There's a lot of I know best. And sometimes there's very personal agendas that are underpinning the conversation, which can actually create a toxic environment.
Definitely. And it's interesting, you, as a priority, you've highlighted how important trust and vulnerability is. And that's why the initial conversation that we spoke about a minute ago is so important, that everybody understands what their role is and what their responsibility is. So then you can build on that, the trust, and open up with your vulnerability. But if you don't have that initial conversation and don't understand each other's role, then you're never going to find trust, are you?
That's absolutely right. And trust is very fickle. So the way I like to think about trust is every single interaction you have with a member of your team, or between the board and the leadership team, every single interaction is an opportunity to either build trust, and it will build very slowly and it will accumulate over time, or to destroy trust, and it will often be destroyed in an instant. So trust is very, very fickle, and the work that I do with boards and leadership teams is really recognizing that every interaction is critical, and how do we take every opportunity to extend and to build trust. So if I just continue the high performance factors for a moment, once you've got that foundation of trust, a whole range of other really productive behaviours start to come into play. So things such as being aligned around a common goal is absolutely critical for high performance. If we're not clear on our vision, if we're not clear on how we're going to get there, you'll find that different agendas will come into play, and that will lead to confusion. So hence the importance of the board and the leadership team co-creating the strategy and getting that real sense of buy-in and commitment. I facilitate a lot of sessions where boards and leadership teams come together, and often the objective of those sessions is not only a high quality strategy, but buy-in and alignment. And if we can get that, you've got a really powerful foundation. From there, high performance teams also have the toolkit and the behaviours to be able to hold each other accountable and to hold themselves accountable. So I really like the concept of ownership thinking or self-accountability. And what that means is everybody's really driving their own personal accountability. They know what needs to be delivered. They're clear on what success looks like for their role. They're able to hold themselves accountable, but they're also able to engage in a really productive conversation at a team level around accountability with the intention of everybody getting better. So they would be some of the key characteristics of what a high-performance team looks like in a school setting.
You talked a little bit there about accountability and what an important role that plays as well in creating a high-performance team. Can you give us some schools, listeners that we have on the podcast, any specific practices that are proven effective ways in your experience of driving that accountability?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Kenton. And you know what? It's one of the areas where I find most schools have an opportunity to really elevate their performance. So if I were to talk to leadership teams or even HODs, heads of departments, often what I hear is, I'm just so busy. I'm just so busy. And it's interesting because busyness is not a sign of productivity, and often it's not an indication of accountability. So we need to be really careful that we don't confuse busyness for actually delivering on the things that matter. I like to think about 3 key steps that leaders can really insert into their own practices, but also the way that they lead their teams that will drive accountability. So the first one is everybody needs to understand what it means to be successful in their role. So what do I need to deliver on? What are the outcomes that I need to deliver in order to be successful? Now, what's really key about that, if we start to talk about a team environment, is we also need to be really clear on what everyone else is accountable for and the results or the outcomes that everybody else is accountable for delivering. So having that visibility and transparency is really critical. The second step is then this sense of self-belief and belief in each other. So now I'm talking about creating a high support environment where we genuinely want to support each other in the team. We want to help each other in the team. And there's a real sense that we can do this. And I've got confidence that you can do this. And how am I going to support you? And this is the role not just of the leader, but of every member of the team to be leading in and supporting. And again, if I go back to trust, which is such an important point, the individual needs to be comfortable saying, you know what, I'm really struggling with delivering this outcome. I've come across some barriers. Can you help me with this?
Yeah, there's vulnerability for you.
Safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's safe to have that conversation,
and
that other members of the team will lean in and support. So that's the second element, belief and support. And then the third and the final element of accountability is to know that the results are being monitored. So many of the listeners would have heard the expression previously that what gets measured gets managed. Now, let's take that to a whole other level. So if we're talking about a high performance team, what I like to think about is each individual knows how they're performing relative to those measures of success. However, they also know how each of their colleagues in the team is performing relative to their measures of success. So now what we've got is full transparency, and you can see why a high trust environment is absolutely critical for this to work. Really practically, you could think about this as being a monthly leadership meeting, and each individual showcases up on the screen, these are my measures of success, or these are my objectives for the month. Red, yellow, green. Let's think about a traffic light. It's a really good way to see what's happening. We all love those traffic lights,
don't we? In the KPI reports.
Yeah, love a good traffic light. And then we can engage in exception reporting. So it's a quick celebration of the things that have worked, and that's really powerful. But then the conversation is, you know what, I'm struggling a little bit with this metric or this measure. Let me explain to you why I've come across some barriers. Can we share some ideas? And the team's going to lean in and help. But the key thing there is having a cadence for consistent measurement around accountability. And you need to be flawless at executing this. If you do it some months and not other months, people get the message that, you know what, you're not really measuring, you don't really care.
Got to be consistent.
But if that can happen consistently, that will really drive accountability.
And also just thinking as you were talking there, like it really just brings it right back to the beginning again of like how important it is that that vision, that shared vision is communicated with everybody so that everybody can see how their little part has such an impact in it. And if only then can you be accountable if you're knowing exactly what it is you're meant to be doing and why, and how that fits in with everybody else as well.
It's the interdependencies that are actually so critical. So I find a lot of schools are effective at identifying their goals for the year at a departmental level or at a leader level. But then what happens is everyone goes off into their silos and tries to deliver them. But pretty quickly they recognize that, hang on, there's some interdependencies here. I'm actually relying on the music department or the sports department to do something. And unless they do their piece, I can't actually deliver on my goal. So it's really about thinking about it at a team level and being really clear on the priorities for the school, not sending different leaders off into their silos.
Now, it's interesting because we actually, our finance team will see that highlighted at the annual budget review time, which in a school where everybody's talks about what is going on in their as a budget holder. This is what I need to do for next year. And it's like, when you bring it all together, go, well, how is that affecting this over here? Or have you actually thought the fact that if we're spending money there, or what about the needs of this department over here? Because if they don't do that, how's that affecting where we're trying to go to unified with our vision? It really does highlight it. Where if you're not working together as a high performance team in collaboration, you're all going to be pulling and pushing in different directions.
Absolutely. I did a review of the administrative function of a school recently, and to highlight your point, Kenton, what they identified and what I identified through talking to the different areas is, first of all, the administrative staff were spread all across the school and they were supporting all the different departments, but they didn't actually come together as a team, the administrative function. When I brought them together as a team, it was like a revelation. It's like, what do you mean you use this provider to do all the travel for the kids? We use another provider here. And goodness, there's been some cost savings here if we got some synergies and some economies of scale.
Just bringing people onto the same page.
Catering was being organized. Yeah, that's right. Catering was being disjointed, and not only was it disjointed and not as cost effective, but it meant that there was additional work being placed on people, where in fact you could streamline a lot of the practices. So this concept of team is really, really important. And even though many schools would talk about it, in practice, in my experience, very few schools actually do operate as a team. There's a lot of silos.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily just happen in bigger schools either. Like it can happen in small teams, in smaller schools as well. It's very much an attitude thing as much as it is a practical thing.
It is. It's an attitude and it's a mindset. And one of the things that I find is really powerful is either at the start of a new term or it might be the start of a new year, is actually identifying who are the key teams that really need to work together if we're going to achieve our goals, and doing a bit of an offsite with them that's framed as a reset. And that reset is really getting their mindsets around what does it mean to be a team, what are the behaviours we need to engage in, and what are our ways of working. And that can be a really powerful way to shift those mindsets. Like you said, Kenton, it's an attitude and it's a way of working.
We chatted a fair bit about collaboration. So Trudy, how do you think school councils and school leadership teams can work together to balance long-term strategic planning with the day-to-day operational needs that every school has to have in place?
Yeah.
How do they achieve that balance?
And this is one of the challenges many schools struggle with. So as mentioned at the start of the podcast, there's a lot of busyness. And I think we're all busy, right? Now, when we're busy, what that usually means is that we're being reactive and we're very focused in operations. We're very focused in what I call BAU, or business as usual. Now, let's go back to the role of the board or the school council. It's to collaborate with the leadership team to create the strategy for the school. And I like to think about the strategy as something that not only defines the vision and the purpose and the values, but more importantly, it's then got a set of strategic priorities or pillars that the school will focus on. And underneath those, there should be very clear objectives. Now, with many schools, when I look at their strategies, I find that those strategic plans are a mishmash of business as usual and strategy. And subsequently, there's a lot to achieve. And I think it's human nature that we go to the urgent things first rather than the important things. And what I find is a lot of the busyness comes from people getting sucked into operations, into BAU, even though that may be on the strategic plan.
And it also makes you very focused on short-term priorities rather than the long-term benefits of the school.
You're absolutely spot on. So the problem with that is we're not focusing on those longer-term things that will shift the dial for the school. So there's so many changes happening within a school environment and external to the school environment. If schools want to continue to be progressive and competitive and deliver on their visions, we need to create the space for those longer term initiatives to actually be given priority. So back to your question, how can the school and the school council and the leadership teams collaborate around this? Number one is actually creating a clear strategic plan that truly is strategy, not business as usual. Now, that's a really important starting point, because if we don't get the foundations right, nothing will happen from that. So separating BAU from strategic priorities. Once we've got that, then understanding how we're going to deliver on the strategy becomes the next challenge to solve. And this is where I find, depending on how involved the school council wants to be and the expertise and the skill set and the capabilities that sit on the board, there may be a place for school council members to get directly involved in delivering on some of the strategic priorities. Now, they may do that because they've got specific subject matter expertise. They may do that because they can be a sponsor of one of the strategies. They may do it because they've got industry or community connections that's going to support the strategy. So that's one way that the councils can work really effectively with the leadership team. But the key there, that it's on the strategies, it's not on business as usual. It's really important that business as usual or operations is clearly defined, and that very much is the domain of the leadership team.
You mentioned as well earlier mindset. You use that term as being so important to effective leadership. Let's maybe talk about that a little bit more and explore that. Like, what behaviours truly are critical for high performance in school leadership and council teams, and how do you encourage and reinforce those behaviours within your school?
So there's a few behaviours that are absolutely critical, and more so now than ever before. The first would be empathy. And when I talk about empathy, it's closely linked to emotional intelligence. So do leaders and boards understand how they're perceived by others? Do they understand the impact on the environment, on their team environment when they're in the room? And is it adding to the team culture, or is it actually detracting from the team culture?
That's really interesting, because I think historically we've always thought if you're adding to a leadership or a council resource within an organisation, you're there to give IQ. But EQ is just as important.
Yes.
And to get that balance between the two.
Critical.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you've got a room of highly intelligent people that don't have a high level of EQ, I can guarantee you they'll be clashing. They won't be able to deliver on the outcomes, and it'll be a pretty miserable experience for most of them. So doing some training around that is really important. And the other element of it, other than understanding yourself, is being able to read and adapt to others. So the head of school or the school principal often will have a very close relationship with the school board or the school council, and it's critical that the council understand the style of the principal and how to get the best out of the principal. But likewise, the principal needs to understand the different styles of all of the board members and how to meet their needs with an appreciation that all of them are looking for different things. So emotional intelligence would be the first behaviour that's absolutely critical.
And the principal also has to turn around and look the other way as well, and do that back to their own school leadership team as well.
Absolutely.
So they're very much in the glue in the middle, aren't they?
Yes, and it's not an easy role, as many principals or any member of the leadership team would appreciate. So the good news about that is emotional intelligence is trainable, and with a focused effort and some deep conversations and some interventions and tools, and we spend a lot of time doing this with boards and leadership teams, it not only builds trust through that process, but it will build that emotional intelligence, which ultimately will lead to productive behaviours. So that the types of behaviours that we're looking for is that when the board and the leadership team come together, it's not an infomercial. And what I'm talking about there is one-way reporting. What we're actually looking for is dialogue, discussion, debate, and it all has to be done respectfully. So one of the key characteristics of high-performance teams is that they can challenge each other's ideas and people don't take it personally. And on the receiving side of that, people are curious. They're actually curious. They're seeking to understand others' perspectives. They want to understand more. And if we can get that environment happening, it will lead to really effective decision making. So what I find for many leadership teams and even boards is they engage in two-way door decisions.
Curious to see what you mean by two-way door conversations.
Yes. So you can think about a situation where when a decision gets made, you walk through the door and then you go, oh, hang on, that wasn't the best decision. We need to reverse it. You can actually reverse that decision. The door flips back the other way. Now, these are perfect decisions to actually delegate down to sometimes the leadership team, sometimes heads of departments. However, the critical role that the board plays, particularly in collaboration with the leadership team, is the one-way door decisions. So these are decisions where we go through the door, we make the decision, but that door doesn't go back the other way. So we're now stuck with that decision. So this is where, for a high-performance team, one of the critical behaviours is to have a methodology around how to make decisions. And many boards don't. What happens is we don't really understand the problem that we're solving for. Often we jump straight to solutions without really going through a process of understanding alternatives and the pros and cons and the risks. And as a result, often poor decisions are made. So 2 key takeaways there. Boards and leadership teams should be making one-way door decisions. Let's think about how we can delegate the two-way door decisions. And secondly, do we have an effective methodology and a well understood process for actually making decisions?
On the podcast, we always like to sort of get our crystal ball out and look ahead and look to the future, maybe let's consider some future trends that you see impacting the roles of school councils and leadership teams. How do you foresee them having an impact on the evolution of high performance teams?
It's a great question, and I wish I did have a crystal ball because it would make things a whole lot easier. However, I think there's some emerging trends that we're seeing. One is generative AI, artificial intelligence. It's here to stay, and every day it's becoming more and more progressive. What that means, I think, is that boards and leadership teams have the opportunity to rethink education and how students will learn in the very near future, because there's a lot of tools now that make it easy for them, but maybe making traditional ways of learning less relevant and less engaging. So with that, let's assume that a whole lot of things that up until now have been very manual and very time consuming, how do we really focus on the relational skills that will actually help take students into the future and help them thrive? So it's going to be more about the meaningful connection, how we build relationships, how we engage as human beings. So teachers who go through a rote process of you need to memorize this and there's not a lot of engagement with students, that's not going to be tolerated in the future. So I think for boards and leadership teams, it's really thinking about what does a great educational experience look like in the very near future while we take on board AI, but also understand the generations coming through and how they're going to use technology and what they expect from that. It also has direct implications on how boards and leadership teams will communicate, how they will engage, how they can accelerate their own learning. So I think there's a whole piece there to think about how do we take high performance teams to another level. The second thing, if I had a crystal ball, would be understanding that virtual or remote learning is going to become more and more accessible and even expected. So
we've seen that a lot in the higher education sector, so much more, aren't we, with the universities?
That's right.
And it's going to become a big part of the normal tertiary school sector too.
Well, I think so. And it opens up huge opportunities to have students based potentially all around the world, right? Or to give students the flexibility to be traveling, possibly with parents, with work demands, but still stay engaged in the school and continue that learning education. So there's looking at the implications of that from a student perspective, and that ties into decision making, but from a high performance team perspective also, how do we come together virtually in a hybrid context, even for simple things such as board meetings? Can we be meeting more frequently in a more productive way to be making shorter, more timely decisions to speed things up, which will lead to high levels of performance versus the classic bi-monthly board meeting? Not everybody's here, we can't make the decisions.
We're definitely experiencing a big trend towards that. Obviously, with the work that we do, all of our work is outsourced and virtual, and we're doing most financial functions for schools outsourced virtually, and the accountants are involved in the leadership of these schools, are attending all of these meetings virtually as well at board level. There's but it's the acceptance of that as well that we are pleased to see.
That's right.
It's like you don't have to sort of try and explain how it could work, or this is an option. It's very much like, no, that's how we want it to be. And we recognise that it's more effective.
Fantastic. And then the third and the final thing I would share with you is recognising that in Australia there's a high prevalence of burnout, and I suspect that's going to continue. So leaders are feeling burnt out, staff and teachers are feeling burnt out, and many students are feeling burnt out as well. So well-being continues to be a big focus. However, despite all of the investment in well-being over the recent years, and there's been a huge investment in schools, the burnout numbers continue to go up. So for me, the work I do with high-performance teams is really getting to the root cause of why people are burning out. And some of the things that we spoke about today will make a big difference. So role clarity, and think about simplifying jobs, but focusing them on the most important things would be one thing to really think about to be mitigating against burnout. Secondly, how do we separate business as usual from strategy? And you may have different members of teams working on different elements. But again, simplify, focus, a really important outcome there. And then the way that we engage. So when we're busy and when we're not collaborating in a meaningful way, what happens is we don't build those meaningful connections, which means we lose our support structure. So how do we create those high trust environments where we can share our challenges, where we can support each other? All of those things will really help mitigate against burnout. It sounds very simple and obvious on the surface. Unfortunately, very few schools do it well.
No. Thank you so much, Trudy, for today. As ever, truly insightful conversation. Keep doing the work you're doing. It's absolutely brilliant. And we look forward to having you on the podcast again in the future.
That's wonderful, Kenton. It's been a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Business of School podcast. We've enjoyed the conversation today and would love to have you join us for future episodes. Please hit the subscribe button and follow the links below to find more information and resources to support you and your school team. Until next time, keep being innovative, keep being awesome, and remember, there is always opportunity to improve on the journey. Thanks for connecting.